We have today Mr. Steve Winston from the National Jewish Assembly. Mr. Steve, welcome to this interview.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
As we know that currently there is a process of releasing hostages, and Hamas has started playing dilly-dally with this issue. And there is the unfortunate news of the murder of a child during this hostage release. And also we are seeing that when Israel is releasing the Palestinian terrorists, they are cheering, they are even openly declaring that they will they will return to the similar terrorist acts targeting Israel in the future. I mean, Israel is definitely releasing the terrorists for the future terrorist acts. So on the other hand, we are seeing that when Hamas is releasing the hostages, they're forcing them for waving fingers and showing a smile face. But we know that even there was one case where a hostage was almost locked in a place without food for the past several weeks. So how do you see this process of hostage release?
So I think, thank you for being very clear in explaining the difference between, what the people that Hamas are sending back to Israel. They are hostages. They were kidnapped from their homes in southern Israel on the 7th of October. Many of their family members were brutally murdered on that same day. So they were taken, they were kidnapped. That is a war crime. That is against international law. The prisoners that you explained the clear difference, the Palestinian prisoners that Israel are holding in prisons in Israel are indeed that. They have been convicted of crimes, many of them. And yes, there are many minors amongst those prisoners, many under 18-year-olds, but they are not children. They are teenagers, and they have participated in terrorist acts against Israeli civilians and soldiers. And they, if we have a saying here: if you commit a crime, you do the time. As in, yes, you get sentenced, and you're sentenced to prison time. So there can be no equivalence drawn between, the hostages who are innocent men, women, and children being released and sent back into Israel, and Israel's release of terrorists who have undertaken terrorist acts. So thank you for drawing that equivalence. I think first and foremost we have to remind ourselves that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and so it's to be expected almost that they would be trying to put themselves across in the international media whilst being filmed in these hostage releases. They would want to be seen to be having treated their hostages with care, getting them to wave goodbye as if to show some level of humanity. But it is entirely propaganda, and anyone with a modicum of understanding of this conflict will realise that is all it is. It is propaganda. Since the hostages have been released, we are hearing more and more testimony, reports from their relatives who are explaining how just as recently as yesterday, one was kept in an attic by an UNRWA teacher in Gaza, a teacher who himself has 10 children, a family man, and he kept this hostage in the attic without access to, decent food, daylight, medical care and attention. Another UNRWA doctor is reported to have kept a hostage in their home. So all of that, together with reports of how senior UNRWA staff on the 7th of October took to their social media accounts celebrating the massacre endorses and further proves that there are links between UNRWA and Hamas, and whether they are links between the organization and Hamas is a question that I don't have the answer to, but it is clear evidence that certain individuals in UNRWA are sympathetic and affiliated with Hamas. With Hamas being the terrorist organization that they are, they'll be playing psychological warfare, and we saw reports yesterday coming out of their Al-Qassam brigade claiming that little baby Kafir and his brother and the mother were reported as having been killed, and Hamas blaming it on an Israeli airstrike, whereas just days before, Hamas had claimed that little baby Kafir and the other brother and mother had been given over to another Palestinian terrorist faction in Gaza, and that Hamas didn't know where they are. So, these claims by Hamas have not yet been absolutely confirmed by Israel. And at the moment, I think we can take it that it's an effort by Hamas to engage, to continue to engage in their psychological warfare against Israel.
One important thing I would like to raise here, Steve, that during these October 7th Hamas pogrom in Israel and the subsequent days, we have heard about the cases of rapes of Jewish women and girls and women by the Hamas terrorists and other Palestinian terrorists. But unfortunately, United Nations, for the decades I have been saying that United Nations is a dirty diaper and it deserves to be disposed of. Now, when the Jewish girls and Jewish women are being raped, United Nations and the so-called feminist activist rights groups, they don't utter a word. They don't condemn such cruelty. I mean, how do you assess such kind of the brutalities and cruelty of the people inside the United Nations?
Well, that's a very good question. Thank you. So, with regard the sheer brutality that we have seen evidence of, on our screens, we have seen how reporters in Western countries and in some European countries, etc., have been shown footage that Hamas themselves took on that day of these atrocities. And yet, as you say, the United Nations have really, once again fouled Israel and the international Jewish community for not coming out stronger against the sheer brutality that was laid out before our eyes on the 7th of October. The UN Women's Group has so far been silent. And in fact, indeed, in London, there have been protests about this. And there is going to be one this coming Sunday, again, focusing on the silence of women's groups across the world, not just within the UN, but women's groups across the world, so self-declared progressive groups, championing the rights of women, which is a very noble cause. But these groups have failed to condemn the brutality that was inflicted on Israeli women and Israeli girls and young children. It's absolutely disgraceful. But then the UN has a long-standing history of demonstrable bias against the Jewish state. So whilst it's very disheartening and very disappointing I I don't find it unsurprising, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I mean, this is definitely a clear case of crime against humanity. And I mean, the sexual violence on the Israeli women and girls and minors in France. I mean, I don't know how to express my anger at the silence of United Nations. I mean, has United Nations become a platform of only protecting the rights of Islamists and terrorists?
I think, when you look at the past history of the United Nations and its obsessive focus on passing resolutions condemning Israel for anything and everything, obsessively focusing on Israel, the UN is definitely biased. Why is it biased? Is it because of institutional anti-Semitism? Perhaps. There is an argument to be made for that, and when you consider the fact that there is the something like 57 Muslim countries, 20 or so Arab countries, and they form a bloc. And unfortunately, some of those countries do tend to use the United Nations to peddle their anti-Israel agenda. Often, we see them using it to hide behind their own very real human rights violations and anti-democratic practices. So there is that at play. It's you say you don't know how to express your disgust at the sheer brutality that played out on October the 7th, but unfortunately, I feel the same. How do we share our sheer disgust and anger and ongoing disgust at the silence of these global institutions? We need to be us here. We are constantly engaging with our ministers of parliament, other community leaders, other organizations, human rights organizations, etc. That's what we can do. But it's the other thing that we are seeing increasingly is denial about what happened on October the 7th, despite survivors' testimony, despite hostages now coming back into Israel, now coming home and speaking out about what they saw on that day and what they endured in their captivity. And yet we see denial. And what other denial have the Jewish people seen since 1945? They've seen a growing trend in Holocaust denial. And so we can see a pattern here that when it comes to the Jewish people, there is this propensity to cast doubt, to cast an aspersion of sinister activity on behalf of the state of Israel. As we've seen, people are trying to claim that the IDF massacred everyone on the 7th of October. I mean, these accusations are sick, but they are out there, and they gain traction on platforms such as Facebook and Twitter, and it goes around the world with the speed of light. And then our own media organizations are they're not helping by continuing seemingly to take facts coming out of Gaza as gospel, and yet when it comes to Israel putting across the facts, they question them and they say, it is claimed that, or this is unverified, but they're not shy about using the figures coming out of Gaza of Palestinian deaths. And you know, let's not forget that it's tragic that there are all those innocent Palestinian people caught up in this. But everything is attributable to Hamas. Hamas on the 7th of October broke the ceasefire that was in existence. And they didn't just break it with rockets, they broke it with an attempted genocide against Israel and its people. We mustn't forget that.
Please, just I'd like to know from you, Steve, that when we're talking about the sexual violence on Israeli women, girls, and infants, when following the October 7th Hamas program, we have seen how notoriously Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, they have given statement in favor of the terrorists. Now, when we are talking about the sexual violence on Israeli women and girls, I didn't see any statement from Jill Biden or Kamala Harris or Nancy Pelosi. I mean, what is the reason behind their silence? Why? They are women also. Why they have not condemned such act of cruelty on the Israeli women and girls?
It really is the million-dollar question. It's unfathomable. It's unacceptable that the First Lady of America has not really spoken out meaningfully against.
It is a condemnable act, actually.
Absolutely, it's atrocious. It's unconscionable, but it is a reality nonetheless that these figures, Kamala Harris, Jill Biden. Yeah.
Sorry, I'd like to interrupt here, because when Joe Biden proclaims openly that he is a Zionist, and his wife, the Jill Biden, she is just remaining silent. I mean, their silence of Jill Biden, silence of Kamala Harris, silence of Nancy Pelosi can be deemed as a kind of endorsement to the Hamas atrocities. Do you agree with me?
I'm not sure from those people that it's some kind of tacit endorsement. I do think, however, that they are very guilty of not taking the opportunity to use their positions to speak out against the abhorrent violence and sexual depravity that was laid upon those Israeli women and young girls that day on the 7th of October. And, you know, goodness knows what the hostages have endured during their captivity. We have seen that even some of the younger children have been made in captivity to watch the recordings of the atrocities on the 7th of October. So it's all of this, the violence against the women, the treatment of the children the child hostages and the female hostages being made to watch what happened, to many of whom will have had loved ones on those recordings, seeing that. Brutal doesn't even come close to describing the actions of Hamas. And we have seen, we are seeing lots of people on social media and in the news, saying that no, Hamas is not the same as ISIS. But really, they have proven themselves to be the same as ISIS. They have no value for human life. In their own words, they value death as people like you and I value life. They cherish death. They worship death. And therefore, the fact that they worship death means that they can attack Israel like they did on the 7th and like they have been sending rockets over since. They can attack, and they don't care about their own people. because to them, their people are weapons against Israel. The more that die, the more sympathy they get from the media. It's a very unfortunate situation.
This Malala Yousafzai, the Nobel laureate, when she was given the Nobel Peace Prize, the Nobel Committee chairman even couldn't answer the journalist why she was given the Nobel Peace Prize. And now this Malala Yousafzai, I have been continuously writing that she is a radical Muslim, she is a radical Muslim, and she is a terrorist sympathizer. Now, when the people are suffering in the state of Israel, when the October 7th Hamas program and the subsequent notorities and atrocities are being condemned by people like you and I, Malala Yousafzai is totally silent. I mean, these are the creations of the Nobel Peace Committee. They have to now answer to me why their Nobel laureates are silent. Where are the voices? They are talking in favor of many issues, on many issues. And you will see that whenever there is something related to the Muslim country, the Malala Yousafzai is the first person to issue a statement, but he is silent, completely silent. And if a Nobel laureate like this is the example, and Malala Yousafzai is the example of Nobel laureate, I think Nobel Peace Committee should be feeling ashamed of.
So you're right, and you don't need me to confirm that. But the silence, we were talking just now about the silence of people like the First Lady and the Vice President of America. Their silence, the silence of people who are Nobel Prize winners. It is unconscionable, and it does call into question the integrity and value of these accolades, such as a Nobel Prize and the organizations that facilitate them. My understanding and sort of comprehension of all of this is that it goes back to a double standard.
Absolutely.
A double standard that we see all too often employed against Israel and, by association, the global Jewish community. And we know that the Natan Sharansky, wonderful man who came up with the 3 Ds of anti-Semitism: delegitimization, demonization, and double standard. And we see this at play every single day. We see it. We saw it daily before the 7th of October massacre. We see it. We are seeing it during this period after the massacre. We see it play out in some of our media. We see it playing out on in parliaments across the world. We're thankful here in the UK for what is generally a very supportive government, our Tory government. And in some countries, in many countries, that's not the case. South Africa, for example, have taken a very pro-Hamas stance. Other countries similar. Whilst a lot of Western countries, thankfully, have taken a very strong stance against Hamas and are behind Israel's right to defend itself and recognise under international law how Israel has the absolute right to attack Hamas's stronghold in northern Gaza, how they recognise that Hamas hide themselves amongst civilian areas and infrastructure. But nonetheless, there is still an overwhelming tsunami of this double standard that we're seeing everywhere. And like you say, it's playing out in institutions, organizations like the Nobel Prize, from the White House and the silence from the First Lady, etc. It's very disturbing. Again, I wish I could say it shocked me, but it doesn't shock me because we are so used to seeing it.
Qatar has been funding hundreds of millions of dollars towards Hamas as well. Qatar has been also spending hundreds of millions of dollars towards the American universities and colleges. Until recently, we have been saying Iran is the patron of Hamas. But now we are seeing that Qatar is a bigger patron of Hamas and terrorist activities, terrorist groups in Gaza. So, I mean, when there is a sanctions on Iran for patronizing terrorism, why now there should be a sanction on Qatar for funding and patronizing terrorism, particularly when during this so-called negotiation we see that actually Qatar is the big boss. Qatar is the big boss of Hamas. Qatar is the big boss of all Palestinian terrorist groups. So why can't we demand that there should be international consequences on Qatar?
Again, that's your summary there. Your point is 100% spot on. Qatar, in terms of financial support, have been much greater benefactors to Hamas than Iran. Iran do provide arms to Hamas and finances. But yes, you're right. Qatar has, over the past few years, been Hamas's main financial benefactor. And, not only that, but they harbour Hamas's top-level people in Doha. Yeah, they keep them there, knowing full well what they're doing. And yes, it's almost as if we live in an upside down world where everything is just, not what it's meant to be. I think at this time, Qatar are playing a crucial role in the negotiations. We've seen, thank goodness, we've seen the return of many of the hostages, but it's not enough. We need them all back, and it's come at a heavy price. Israel is releasing prisoners, many of whom are terrorists. They are all convicted of crimes. They are not kept in prison without having done anything. So it's a heavy price, but it's good that we're getting the hostages back, and Qatar have been playing a crucial role. But can it be said that they are good faith actors? No. They're still funding Hamas. They're still harboring Hamas's top level people. So it's a very unusual situation. However, Israel are engaging with this process, and that's because they want their hostages back. And they have no other choice at the moment. But since October the 7th, and before, but definitely since October the 7th, we have seen increasing calls for Qatar to be censured as a state sponsor of terrorism. And I would hope that let's please God get through this, and let's get all the hostages back. But then I do think that a focus needs to be spotlighted on Qatar and its sponsoring of terrorism and its role in where Hamas is today, and how it has managed to engineer its massacre against Israel on October the 7th.
As we have almost reached to the last part of our interview, so very briefly, I'd like to ask a question from you. That, as you know, that more than 2 decades now, our newspaper is operating from Bangladesh, with online and print edition, Bangladesh, the third largest Muslim country, and unfortunately, majority of whom are very much anti-Semitic. Sitting in this country, if we can run a newspaper for decades, tell the truth, defend the state of Israel, confront anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial, what stops the Western media from doing the same?
That's a very challenging question. My first thought is that the Western mindset has always been one of rooting for the underdog, standing up for the oppressed. And one thing that the Palestinian leaders over the decades have been very successful in is propaganda and portraying themselves as the victims in this conflict. And, as time goes by, subsequent generations aren't aware of the historical facts of this conflict. They aren't necessarily aware of how many occasions there have been for Palestinian leaders to accept offers that would result in them being able to have a state of Palestine, independence, true independence. And the Western media have played a role in that with their bias. And let's be honest, I think it's human nature, perhaps, to look at war unfavorably. People don't want to see war breaking out. People, for example, on the 7th of October, when the massacre happened, it took Israel not a long while, but a while to organize itself to retaliate against, in Gaza against Hamas, and with the numbers coming out from Hamas about the Palestinian fatalities, it's not nice to hear. We know, the likes of you and I know, and other people with a vested interest in this conflict, we know that nothing coming out of Gaza can be trusted, and we know that the Ministry of Health in Gaza is run by Hamas. We know that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and therefore, nothing can be taken at face value. But nonetheless, the Western communities, the Western countries and their media, they parrot these facts. They don't question them. They put them out there, and it disturbs people. People don't want to see. They think, my goodness, okay, it was terrible enough that Hamas massacred 1,200 Israelis on the 7th of October, but now we're hearing that 20,000 Palestinians are killed, and amongst those are 4,000 or 5,000 children. And no one wants to hear that. So there is this need for the media to be more careful about what they accept in terms of the information coming out of Gaza. But the Western mindset is a very liberal, progressive mindset, and that's not in itself a bad thing. But a part of that is anti-war, and people don't like it.
We were talking to Mr. Steve Winston from the National Jewish Assembly, and Mr. Steve, thank you so much for giving us the time. And in the future, we will again return with more interviews with you, of you and your viewers. You have been listening to Mr. Steve Winston, and stay with us.
Thank you very much.